results from the medical examiner's office. So here, as the physical recovery ends, the emotional recovery for this city will continue. Reporting live from Ground Zero, Whitney Casey, CBS 2.
Here we go.
Whitney, thank you, and we'll check back with you a little later on in the morning. Right now, though, we'd like to take a closer look at the incredible effort by all of the workers at the site. More than 1.6 million tons of debris have been removed from Ground Zero. It's taken 108,000 truckloads to take all of this away. Workers have put in more than 3 million hours of labor to clean up the ruins of the Trade Center. And as the cleanup ends, more than 1,100 victims of the terror attacks have been identified. 1,600 additional death certificates have been issued without a body being found at the request of the victims' families.
The World Trade Center towered over Lower Manhattan for 3 decades as a symbol of strength.
Now officials are left with the challenge of rebuilding that site while honoring the tragedy and heroism that occurred there.
CBS 2's Marcia Kramer has more on what's next. She is live at Ground Zero. Marcia?
Well, Cindy, it's both easy and difficult to talk about what's next for Ground Zero. Easy to say that there will be memorials and there will be more buildings, but difficult to say just what kind of memorial and what kind of buildings. And as you can imagine, there are many different opinions.
Please, if you're going to put buildings on that site, build one of the 7 modern wonders of the world.
There's a lot of discussion about reconnecting Day, Fulton, and Greenwich Street. Those would totally infringe on not only the site where people died, but I think anybody's ability to experience any kind of quiet contemplation when they're visiting the site.
People attending the Lower Manhattan Redevelopment Corporation's first public meeting on what to build at the World Trade Center had a lot of different ideas about what they want or don't want to see at the site where so many innocent people tragically lost their lives when terrorists attacked America on September 11th. And while development officials want to hear all the viewpoints, all the ideas, they're being guided by one principle, one concern, developing both a reverent memorial and a vibrant community that complement one another.
How can they coexist? That really is the problem that has to be solved, because if you have a vibrant community and a reverent memorial, especially since the memorial's in the area of the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, and other critical parts of American history, I think that lots of people will come.
Lots of people is a big concern for the developers. Get this, they expect an additional 10 million people a year to come to Lower Manhattan once the memorials and the buildings are complete. So every decision has to include concerns for getting those people to the area and moving them around.
There's a lot of mass transit down here. How do you make the most effective use of that mass transit infrastructure? How do you make provision for new access to the area? These are all questions that the planners will be looking at and presenting alternatives.
And as the city prepared yesterday to redirect the mission at Ground Zero from recovery to redevelopment, there was a curious juxtaposition of competing concerns. In one corner, firemen used small rakes to sift through debris to find any remaining body parts of loved ones who will never come back. All that stops today, but while that sad rite continued for the very last time, workers in other parts of Ground Zero had already pushed on to the next phase. The reconstruction of the 1 and 9 subway lines is already on its way, with completion expected by November, just 6 months from now. Likewise, repairing the path tunnels, which will take a year longer. And the bulldozers are already at work starting the reconstruction of the building that once was 7 World Trade Center, with one significant difference. Greenwich Street, which stopped before the building, will now be allowed to go through.
It isn't determined whether it would go through as a vehicular street, pedestrian street, or a view shed, but the possibility exists for any one of those 3.
And let's not forget that memorial. Planners want it to be significant, a tribute to the people who lost their lives, but also reflecting a major event in the history of America, located at a site where history has already been made so many times. Ellis Island, George Washington addressing the troops, the New York Stock Exchange, the Statue of Liberty.
We must have an area for the memorial, and it has to be an area sufficient to have the kind of memorial we all wish for, which is reverent and calm, and a place where people can reflect. And then many people said also a place where people can learn, where maybe there would be a museum near the memorial.
And as for the buildings, well, all that will come in time. There will be many plans proposed and many discussed before the final plan is made public in December. And still, there are many who feel like this woman.
And if you're going to make buildings there, like the gentleman that said before you just said, I think I agree with 100%. We should make a building there as tall as we can to show the terrorists that we as Americans are not afraid.
Now, she's right. As Americans, we can't be afraid, but what we can be is reverent. And that's why, starting today, there will be an honor guard made up of police, firemen, other uniformed services to stand here at this site just to show our respect. Reporting live from Ground Zero, I'm Marcia Kramer, CBS 2.
Marcia, thank you.
It took 200 years to build this section of Lower Manhattan into a powerhouse of financial work. And it took 3 hours to destroy it. The most remarkable thing is that there's still smoke. It's still smoking. You expect the smoke to be gone after 6 days, but not so. Underneath the smoke, still people who are hoping that are alive, but more and more we realize they're not going to be.
But we don't have any substantial amount of hope that we can offer to anyone that we're going to be able to find anyone alive.
And with those words, the slow and saddening task at Ground Zero lost much of the hope that had been sustaining it. Only 218 bodies had been recovered.
This is an act of God!
But even at a darkest hour, the light of faith sometimes shines through. On this day, a cross made of steel beams was found amid the rubble. For those at Ground Zero, every little bit helped. So did remembering and mourning. The families of those who died on September 11th gathered at Ground Zero a month and a half later for the first official memorial service. As is often the case, grief was overcome by outrage. Angry members of the New York City Fire Department punched police officers and tried to storm Ground Zero after the city decided to cut back the number of rescue workers. They saw it as a betrayal of the more than 300 firefighters still buried in the rubble. Only 91 of their brothers had been recovered. The fires that had been burning at Ground Zero since the attack, truly the fires of evil, are finally extinguished. It has been 100 days. It takes 4 months for recovery crews to literally reach Ground Zero, the bottom of the World Trade Center complex, 7 stories underground. 6 months after the attacks, a time to pay tribute. For 30 days, twin towers of light reach into the sky from Ground Zero to fill the hole torn in New York's skyline. 3 months ahead of schedule, Mayor Bloomberg announces the Ground Zero cleanup will end on May 30th. The death toll now stands at 2,830. The estimated $7 billion cleanup cost only $750 million. And in the final moment of the recovery effort, there stands a pillar of strength and determination, a 30-foot girder erected at that spot more than 30 years ago and remained standing when the towers collapsed, is ceremoniously removed. May 28, 2002, the day the World Trade Center truly came down. This is Bill Butel.
Those images bring so many memories back, bad memories. In fact, one of the men at the center of it all, former Police Commissioner Bernard Carrick. Mr. Carrick, does today's ceremony, moving from recovery to rebuilding, does it offer any closure?
I think to some extent it lets the people of the city, this country, know that we can move on. We're going to move on from here. We're going to rebuild, recover, and basically send the terrorists a message. And that is, we're not going to be intimidated. We're not going to cower. And you may have heard us, but we're coming back much stronger and bigger than we were in the past.
A lot of people here today are thinking in the farthest reaches of their mind, could it happen again? What's your response to that question?
My response is, if we don't do what we're supposed to do, it will happen again. You know, these towers were bombed in 1993 by some of the associates and same people that were in those planes. They hit the Al-Kabar towers, they hit the coal, they hit the embassies in South Africa. We weren't doing what we should have done. I think President Bush, I think Director Mueller, they're doing what they're supposed to do now. I think the blame game in Washington has to stop. Take the money we need, put it into resources, put the intelligence networks together, tie in the local state police departments, and do what we're supposed to do this time.
And it won't happen again?
Well, we'll try our best. You can't stop every incident, but you'll do a much better job than we've done in the past.
We watched you throughout the entire week following September 11th, side by side with former Mayor Giuliani. You lost so many personal friends and colleagues. What are your thoughts today?
How much stronger they made this city. You know, we have to remember that their dying wasn't in vain. They were protecting our freedoms. These were courageous people that committed acts of valor on a daily basis, but they showed the whole world what the NYPD and the New York City Fire Department does every day. There is none better than the people that died here.
And we see the signs around the city. They will not be forgotten. Former Police Commissioner Bernard Carrick, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you. Firefighters all around the city are on duty today, so many of them could not be here. Anthony Johnson is in Staten Island with some firefighters who will watch the ceremony this morning on television. Anthony.
Are we? Yes, yes, good afternoon, or rather good morning to you. We're here inside of Rescue 5. We were just talking to one of the deputy chiefs over here. He was just asking us and telling us what's going to be happening here in just a few minutes from now. You know, Rescue 5, just like a lot of firehouses around the city, they went out on the morning of 9/11 trying to help out, trying to help rescue anybody that might have been trapped in those towers on that day. But all of the members that went out, 11 of them never came back home. And everywhere you look inside of the firehouse, there's something to show you, something to remember. The 11 members who never came back home and the fire department in here. As a matter of fact, you can see all kind of banners, all kind of stuff that makes you just remember how much the people around the country love the firefighters that have gone out, risked their lives, sacrificed what they did. As a matter of fact, we can show you some of the bunker gear here. Now you see where the American flags are located. Those represent the members that never came back home. As we go down the line of bunker gear, you can see several of the firefighters, their bunker gear is still in place even at this location. Now, here at this firehouse, in just a few minutes from now, as a matter of fact, at 10:29, right outside of the firehouse, a chaplain is going to say a prayer. So at the same time, the service is going to be starting down there at Ground Zero. They're going to have a prayer. Now, they're going to bring the truck in, the Rescue 5 truck in just a few minutes from right now. That truck was actually down there on September the 11th. The truck was slightly damaged, but they were able to go ahead and repair that truck, and so the members are still able to use it. But this is a house where a lot of memories are, and a lot of people are still very upset, feeling the pain from what happened on September 11th. In Staten Island, Anthony Johnson, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Anthony Johnson, for that report from the firehouse. Those people will always be in our hearts and our memories. And I have seen on the monitor here as we've been watching that Mayor Bloomberg has arrived and several other VIPs and dignitaries as we get ready for the ceremony at 10:28. And to go over the numbers again, 1,102 people have been identified. 1,616 people have been given death certificates without identification, and just 105 are officially, Roz, still listed as missing.
All right. As we're going to take some shots of the Ground Zero area, you mentioned Mayor Bloomberg. There he is right now.
To cool things up. But we'll show you around here a little bit later. Steve, back to you in the studio.
All right, Rick, we thank you very much. It is it's just about, I have to stop playing this. It's going to be 7:22 in 11 seconds.
I'm clocking you.
We got to get these things together.
What? No, but there's an awful lot of remembrance going on.
So many people. Surprised, Roz.
It's different. You know, it's totally different what we do. I'm a woodman. It's quite difficult.
Not many people worried about money as we cleaned up this site and we began the process of trying to rebuild.
NJ Burkett is standing by for us with a quick wrap. NJ.
Roz, we are 3 blocks from Ground Zero. This is Warren and West Street, the West Side Highway, where as you can see behind me, people have lined up for blocks. They've lined up for 3 blocks in this direction, another 3 or 4 blocks up this direction, lining the route where the steel beam will be taken, where the stretcher with the American flag will be taken, where the dignitaries and the family members, the firefighters, Port Authority police officers, and NYPD officers will lead that procession on the West Side Highway. It's a very solemn scene. People are fairly quiet here. They're not really talking to one another, standing around watching and waiting for what happens. One of those people who's here with me right now is Joe Torelli. And Joe, you were here on the 11th. You were here when the buildings came down. And why did you feel like you needed to be back?
I just felt for closure I needed to be back here. I have a few friends that I lost here at Cantor. I work in the area, and I just felt that I should be here.
Joe, thank you very much. Joe Torelli, typical of the people lining the route here on the West Side Highway. Back to you, Roz and Ron.
Thank you, and Jay. We are live from Ground Zero, awaiting the official end of the recovery effort. As we've been saying all morning, it is amazing how much has changed down here in the last 8.5 months.
It certainly has, and just in the last hour, so many police officers now arrived. They've lined the street. Now there are hundreds of them here. Victims' families are lined up. They will be watching today's ceremony and remembering the victims who have been lost in the World Trade Center, more than 2,800 of them. The ceremonies are about to begin, and for that we go to Peter Jennings in ABC News.
Not quite. In just a few minutes at 10:29, an empty flag-draped stretcher symbolizing remains not recovered will leave Ground Zero. Now we're going to go to Peter Jennings for the ceremony live.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Peter Jennings at ABC News headquarters in New York. We interrupt our regular program for an event we are quite certain you will want to witness. The final act in the recovery effort at Ground Zero, almost 9 months, 260 days after the country was attacked. This morning, there is a chance for all of us to think again, together, on the magnitude of this attack, of all the lives lost, 2,823 of all the lives disrupted in so many other ways, and also to think about the great effort by the men and women who were determined not to leave this site, which they call the pit, until the job was done. And when they arrived, it looked pretty insurmountable. This is a ceremony today arranged by the City of New York after many suggestions and, as always, a few complaints. There will be no spectacle, which most everybody thinks is appropriate, no speeches, no eagle soaring out of the pit, as someone suggested, but a simple ceremony and a departure from the place where so many memories have been ground into the earth, opened and embracing the city hopes for all of us, wherever we are in the country, who have an interest here. That's what it looks like from the other side of the Hudson River, from Hoboken in New Jersey, reminding us that on the other side of the river in Staten Island, at a place called Fresh Kill, which is a landfill, they continue to go through the millions of tons of rubble which were removed from this site in the hope that for some member of some family or some friend they will find something more from one of the victims who died at the trade towers. Think back what it has been in this place since September the 11th. It was sometimes only from the air that you could appreciate it. 16 acres of ground. As it continued, millions of people came from around the world wanting to see. And the site changed day by day, shovelful by shovelful. And every so often they would find something. In April, it began to look somewhat more like a construction site. And then on Tuesday night, this week, they found and established there the last beam from the South Tower, which will be removed today as part of this very simple ceremony. It was cut down by the ironworkers. It was put on a flatbed trailer. It was covered in black muslin draped in the American flag. As you can see, at one point there were so many flowers on it. George Stephanopoulos, my colleague, is down there overlooking the site of the trade towers this morning. George, give us a quick sense of mood.
Well, Peter, obviously down at the site on the ground in that pit today, which is very scrubbed down, as you can see, it's solemn, it's silent. Only the families and the firefighters who worked so long and so hard at this site are down there, but it's surrounded by a beehive of activity. And I think what captured the site best for me is something that Reverend Brian Jordan said today. He said this is not a cemetery, but a shrine that points toward the future, and that's what people are here for today.
Thank you, George. They're simply going to walk out of the site, walk off the site, at which they have worked in many cases 12 and 14 and 16-hour shifts day in and day out. It has turned out, many of them recognize, in these final days and hours, difficult for them. As one of the firefighters said today, it was tough to come here, and it is tough to leave. Ringing of the ceremonial Fire Department of New York fire bell, the signal that a firefighter is down. .343 firefighters were lost, 23 members of the New York City Police Department, and 37 members of the Port Authority Police Department. The empty stretcher to honor and memorialize all those people they could not find. You know that in the course of these many months, every so often work would stop. They'd find a body, sometimes the parts of a body, sometimes the tiniest parts of a body, giving yet another family some hope. But they've only identified the remains of about 1,000 people, and while the effort will continue, it may be hugely difficult to satisfy so many families. And this empty stretcher today is to honor those who may never be identified. For all the talk of closure, which seems to some victims' families pop psychology, it is difficult for some, and there is no closure here because there has been nothing for them of their families to find. And there was some debate about whether even this ceremony should be held on a weekday when some of the victims' families couldn't attend. But overall, most people have been, as best we can tell, satisfied with the city's efforts to honor the end of a job. If you have been to New York, and so many people have you, and been to the site, you will perhaps appreciate how huge an area this is. 16 acres, the whole Trade Center area downtown, with buildings still adjacent to it today, in uncertain condition, with their owners not sure whether to tear them down or build again. But today reserved for the families, of course, and all the people who worked here. That's the firefighters, the police, the steel workers, the men of every imaginable building trade, some of whom had helped to build the trade towers in the first place, as we know, who would not leave here until they felt their job was done. And every single artifact, the stretcher, the last beam which will be moved today, symbolizing so much strength and resilience of the city, so much meaning. In firehouses all over the country, including this one, Engine 33, Ladder 9 in Lower Manhattan today, where they lost 10 men on September the 11th, things have come to a halt so they may share in the occasion.
God bless you all.
The work finished ahead of schedule, which says something about determination, without a serious injury at the site, which says something about the care taken. More than 1.5 million man-hours worked, which says something about the magnitude of the effort. The scale of the job, the way in which it was conducted and finished, has become very much a part of New York City. It has been a very conscientious effort to show that this great American city, which belongs to Americans of every kind and people from many other parts of the world, is absolutely determined to show that the city will not be overcome, and that we will not forget. One young man said down today, "This is the closest I can get to being with my fellow workers who were not found." "1,700 victims for whom no remains have been identified." Even the pipe and drum units of the various agencies, the police, the fire department, the Port Authority, have worked almost non-stop since the 11th, attending funerals all over the area of men in the services, the fire department, the police department, and the Port Authority, who did not survive. We say it often, the death toll now stands at 2,823, and no intact body has been found since April. Though even today, here at the site and where the rubble has been taken to be sifted on the other side of the Hudson River there, always being sifted one more time, there's some little thing that may mean something to somebody. Tools in the car we heard about today, the last birthday present in the trunk of a car, rings, wallets, pictures. There's always a little something. There is some talk that there should be a permanent honor guard for Ground Zero in the days and months and years ahead, not unreminiscent of one that is stationed at the Tomb of the Unknowns at Arlington National Cemetery. Hundreds of suggestions of how the future should remember the past. It has been, as we'll come to perhaps a little later, not nearly as controversial as it was, for example, in Oklahoma City. But everything here, as we've said before, every single artifact has such deep and symbolic meaning, if not for all, for some. On Tuesday night, when they cut this last steel beam still standing at the World Trade Center down, and it is the last steel beam which you see on this flatbed truck now, there were so many flowers around it and on it that they had to be carted away or moved out of the way by the armload. People had spray painted the various agencies of the search and rescue operation onto the beam.
Detail.
And then it was wrapped in black muslin and the American flag. The job for so many workers who've been at Ground Zero for all these many months may be over, but not the experience. and in moments we shall hear taps. Most famous bugle call in American history. Taps. Begun in the Civil War, telling men to put their candles out, came to be a call to soothe men in the dead of night who certainly needed it, and has now become a final tribute to the dead. Day is done, all is well, safely rest, God is nigh. And to fly past by the police helicopters. Common sight in New York City, but never such a gripping sight perhaps as that day on 9/11 when they hovered over the towers, becoming almost instantly aware on that occasion they could do nothing.
Coming this way.
People who come here and see this from the air. I saw it from a helicopter last night over the East River, and the site is so empty. But from any perspective, and from every perspective, it is so moving and still such a shock to people who are seeing it for the first time. No speeches today from Rudolph Giuliani, and on his right, Mayor Bloomberg. Governor Pataki is here. All the officials are there. None will speak today. Police department leaving the site. Senator Schumer of New York, Senator Clinton of New York is there as well. Former Mayor Giuliani, beside him Mayor Bloomberg, Governor Pataki of New York. It is the state government in New York City which has enormous influence and sway over what will be built here in the future, and we'll, as I said, talk a little about that when this is over, but it has been reasonably conflict-free, with everybody fully appreciating that part of this 16 acres must be a memorial, and that the ultimate aim is also to smooth this area back into the downtown economic life of New York City. Representatives of the Greek Orthodox Church, former mayors are here. Mayor Koch, who was the vibrant, gregarious mayor of this city for a long time. But certainly in the post-Second World War period, there has been no mayor here who has been tested so or performed so well as I think the country in many ways thought Rudolph Giuliani performed.
Honor guard, left and right, face, forward, hug.
"37 members of the police department from the Port Authority died, 23 from the New York City Police Department, and as we have said many times, 343 from the firefighters. The men who were going upstairs when everybody else was trying to get downstairs or was unable. And here in one of the firehouses, as we said this morning, Engine 33, Ladder 9. They lost 10 men at Ladder 9, 4 of whom remain unidentified on that particular day. And if you go around, if you're in New York and go around the city now, firehouses have become places to visit and places where people from other cities and other countries are always welcome. Firefighters are a very tight-knit family. Many of the wives of fallen firefighters have found their most important solace in the firehouses today. There have been several books written about the experience that the men had on 9/11 and since. This particular steel beam will, reminding us of all the emotions it evokes, strength, tears, sweat, hope, inspiration, and unfailing spirit, will be part of the memorial itself, which will be designed for the site. An architectural firm in New York City has recently been given the overall mandate to try to guide things in the general direction for the future under the leadership of a very well-thought-of man named John Whitehood, former Wall Street executive, former official in the State Department. George Stephanopoulos, time for you, if you wouldn't mind, to talk a little bit about the future. You spent a lot of time thinking about it.
Well, Peter, as you said, it's been so far less controversial than the situation at Oklahoma City. And I think a lot of the families here learned from the experience of Oklahoma City and have talked to the families from Oklahoma City to try and figure their way through this process. But it hasn't been without all controversy. Many of the families did want this entire site to be a memorial. Of course, that was opposed by some of the developers and others who said that's simply not possible. We need an economically viable southern Manhattan. A lot of citizens here, 700, at our town meeting here last week, said the most important thing to do is to rebuild the Twin Towers, all 110 stories, and show the terrorists that they can't win by sending that message. But there is now a rough consensus developing that the site will be divided. A memorial will take the place on the footprints of the Twin Towers, which I think we're looking at right now, and there will be other office buildings built on the site, perhaps not of the magnitude of 100 stories, about 70 stories. It'll take about 6 months to develop the final plans.
Seeing this procession, George, head off to the direction of the West Side Highway on the west side of the island of Manhattan is to be reminded that there are still people down there every day who stand at certain hours of the day and thank the workers who have been going to the site for all these months and days.
And we saw, just as the honor guard first left, the families clapped, applauded for the police and the firefighters as they left the site. And you're right, this has become a place to visit and a place to show gratitude for the hard work that so many have devoted for so long here on the site of Ground Zero.
And as we travel around the country, it's impossible not to notice that one of the great connections made between New York City and the rest of the country these days are the firefighters. Some of them have biked across the country, some of them have gone out to thank other communities around the country who gave money in the very early days and sometimes continue to give money for the dependents of the firefighters who were left. And you could show up in any number of towns and cities across the country and run into a New York firefighter there to say thank you. The skyline, we all know, millions of us now have come to appreciate how much it has been changed. Seeing it from the air is quite astonishingly dramatic. But as George says, there is a real effort here to reintegrate the area, the site itself, into the downtown life of New York City, not wishing to make it special, wishing it to soar again, wishing it to accommodate the life and the energy of the city. For example, 50,000 kids go to school downtown, and so there is a need to reconnect it for children. Already they have begun to put in some of the infrastructure. The subway stations have to be rebuilt. There needs to be new power put under this 16-acre site. There need to be stations for both trains and for subways here. And the new mayor of New York, Mike Bloomberg, who I think it's fair to say has been well regarded for his attitude towards the recovery in the city by pretty much everybody in the city, has said very clearly that the idea of getting the city to live again in this particular place and to thrive again and to accommodate the needs of this very crowded city again come before a memorial. But there will indeed be a memorial. The ubiquitous cell phone, one more worker calling up one more friend or one more family member to say, well, this was my last day on the job for now. Many of them will go looking for work and go back to the Union Hall and wait to see what work there is. Others will go on and work on other projects. But clearly the finality of the day is going to be difficult for many, many people. As someone who lives in the city, I think that one of the strengths that people from all over the country get, but particularly those who have been so deeply affected by this, is from simply being part of this great American city on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, the Hudson, between the Hudson and East Rivers. We're going to take you back to regular programming now. On the West Coast, Good Morning America continues. We'll, of course, have a full report on the day during World News Tonight. You can read about it, talk about it always at abcnews.com. We're glad you shared this with us this morning. I'm Peter Jennings.
what will happen now as they are getting toward the conclusion of the official day of ending cleanup at the World Trade Center is that the NYPD and the Fire Department of New York, the FDNY, and PAPD, which, as we just mentioned, the Port Authority Police Department, their ceremonial units, which you are seeing now, are forming a line across the top of that ramp that went from down of the pit under the World Trade Centers, with the cellar, the pit, whatever you would call it. The ramp came up for 500 feet, and that's where the procession was. They are, all of them, jointly together, forming a line across the top of the ramp, and that will officially mark the closing of the site, the recovery effort over the thoughts to rebuilding beginning. And as I mentioned, there are no specific plans in place. There have been estimates of it costing anywhere between $23 and $100 billion to replace this. They have hired an architectural firm, not with plans, but to go through the various possibilities. Should they rebuild large towers? Should this be a park? Should it be a mixed use? And we are drawing to the conclusion now. Let's listen in. For the most part of this ceremony, just extremely moving, and it was a wordless ceremony, and we tried to do our part as well as we could at those moments to stay out of it and let us all try to share what was going on in New York today as they officially close the recovery effort at the World Trade Center. Very touching, very, very moving in New York. And you hope that it helps for all the people who have been involved, all the people who will never, apparently ever, know the final word on their loved ones, because there were well over 1,000 people not identified and perhaps never will be. So you're seeing people leaving at the end after the official sealing off of the recovery effort. All right, we're going to bring it back here now, and what we will do in what is obviously a reconfigured broadcast this morning, because we did want to go to New York and have that for you. We'll take a break. When we come back, we will update the news. We will revisit what happened here, and we'll take you through the some of the emotional highlights of what you just saw, and we'll also go live for a report in New York as well, and then the rest of the show, and you know what that is like. So let's take a break, and we'll come right back.